Shabbat Shalom. One of the values that most of the Jewish people holds in common, no matter his or her level of observance, is Judaism's demand for us to learn. Some of us have become profound masters of our chosen profession. Some of us learn together Jewish texts and the wisdom of our tradition. Whether it be secular learning or Jewish learning, oftentimes we learn to gain context. In a Jewish sense, we seek context to understand why we light candles on Shabbat. In a secular professional sense, we want to know context to better understand how a lawsuit began. According to dictionary.com, context is defined as the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood. The problem with this definition is that I have learned about the events of the Shoah my entire life. And the more, quote-unquote, context I learn for the events of the Shoah in Europe, the more history, the more dates, the more books that I read, the less I seem to understand how it could have happened. This past week, my Facebook and Twitter feeds were full of images of friends and colleagues standing at Auschwitz and other concentration camps, all participating in the March of the Living. You already know that my four grandparents prevailed the Shoah. Approximately 200 of my family members were murdered across Europe at the hands of Nazis and others in concentration camps and forests, in streets, in unimaginable ways that in fact were all imagined by people, enemies of the Jewish people, enemies of humanity. And I've never felt the need or the desire to travel back to those sites, support those economies, or stand on those killing fields. The events of the Shoah are a topic to which I was exposed at an age much younger than most. In fact, the history of the Shoah runs through my veins, for I have looked into the loving eyes of my grandparents, and I have seen in their eyes the images, the memories, what they saw, the murder and loss and tragedy and degradation, and survival, courage, and triumph. And now you look into my eyes and see the eyes who saw theirs. My question this morning is it enough? Are speeches enough? Are museums enough? Just days ago on April 12th, 2018, the New York Times published an article by Maggie Astor titled, "Holocaust is Fading from Memory, Survey Finds." The piece reported, and now I quote, 31% of Americans and 41% of millennials believe that 2 million or fewer Jews were killed in the Holocaust. The actual number is around 6 million. 41% of Americans and 66% of millennials cannot say what Auschwitz was, and 52% of Americans wrongly think that Hitler came to power through force. As we get farther away from the actual events, 70 plus years now, it becomes less forefront of what people are talking about or thinking about or discussing or learning, said Matthew Bronfman, a board member of the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, which commissioned the study. If we wait another generation before you start trying to take remedial action, I think we're really going to be behind the 8 ball. End of quote. How could it be that I see so many Jewish people in Europe right now, and 66% of millennials here in America are so detached from the facts? Friends, this is the silo effect made so clear in the last election cycle. Meaning to say, we can live in the same place, but live life according to alternative information. I'm standing here telling you that things need to change. This week's Parsha in the Torah, Parshat Shmini, presents two different reactions to tragedy. We learn this week about the death of two of Aaron's sons. Vayakrivu lifnei Adonai esh zara asher lo tziva otam. They bring what's called in the Torah an esh zara, a foreign fire, uninvited by God, that was not commanded. And they die before God. Following their deaths, the Torah shows us two different paradigms for reacting to such tragedy. On one hand, we see Moses. Vayomer Moshe el Aaron, hu asher diber Adonai lemor bikrovai kadesh ve'al pnei chol ha'am ekaved. And Moses said to Aaron, this is what God told us, saying, I will be sanctified by those who are closest to me, and I, meaning God, will be honored before the entire people. And on the other hand, we see the polar opposite. We see Aaron's reaction, Vayidom Aharon, and Aaron was silent. Moses tries to explain the events in context. God put forth rules on who enters, which fire is appropriate. Something inappropriate occurred. Moses, a man of reason, a man of law, tries to understand the deaths in context. Why did this happen? Aaron, whose immediate family, his sons die, performing the very ritual tasks in which he himself is so familiar, to which he is so committed. From him, there is absolutely nothing to say. For my grandparents, anti-Semitism, the irrational hatred of Jewish people passed down from generation to generation, was larger than context. It was and is simply part of the world. It has and always will be part of Germany and all of the rest of Europe. They didn't need greater context. Their direct families were murdered. My family was murdered. The events felt so familiar, it didn't need context. My grandparents spoke to us, family, but for the large part, they were the generation of Aaron. And it is my parents' generation, the children of the prevailers of the Shoah. They are the generation of research, the generation of building museums, the generation of producing films, the generation of context. They are the generation of Moses. And now we know, with all the museums and all the films and all of the research, the survey quoted in the New York Times show that people no longer understand the events of the Shoah from only 70 years ago. And so I'd like to suggest a third way, not the way of Moses and not the way of Aaron. I'd like to stand here and offer this morning the way of Miriam. For it is Miriam who speaks up for those without a voice in the Torah. Midrash tells us that after Pharaoh decrees that all Jewish male babies be cast into the river, Miriam's father makes a misguided decision and encourages all of the Jewish husbands and wives to separate rather than procreate and, God forbid, give birth to a male child. But Miriam speaks up and convinces him about the continuation of the Jewish family, and that it's a mistake. And by speaking up, Moses is the next child that's conceived. And Miriam approaches Pharaoh's daughter without hesitation and speaks up for baby Moses, vulnerable in the hands of the daughter of the most powerful man in the world. And as a result, Moses is reunited with his mother for a period of time. Miriam is unabashed. Miriam is outspoken. And my grandma, Marie Gammy Lebovitz, her Hebrew name was Miriam. She, in fact, was unabashed, outspoken, opinionated, and proud. The way of Miriam in the Torah is to carry the tambourine and celebrate joyfully in public, to inform Moses that his personal indiscretion cannot remain hidden from the people. The way of Miriam is to shine light to what ought to be, what needs to be said. And I often find myself thinking of her, Gammy, when I travel and speak about my films, which encourage Jewish people and all people to advocate for ideals like Torah, like truth, morality, and the sacred city of Jerusalem. And in those moments, I recognize that the reason that advocacy comes easily to me, the reason I can stand up here unabashed, is probably because the tradition of Miriam runs through my family, through Gammy, through me, and now through the most unabashed member of this congregation, my youngest daughter, whose Hebrew name is Miriam, named after Gammy. Between the strength of my grandfathers and the soft-spoken nature of my Grandma Faye, Gammy offered us a third way. And that third outspoken way is not offered in the Torah this week. And we are often timid to use it as a people. But the truth is that there are times when we must. The generation of prevailers are simply dying. And the eyewitness testimony and the inspiration that they brought to the subject will disappear with them. So maybe after 70 years, we should stop and ask ourselves, why is it important that anybody knows where Auschwitz is? Why is it important that people know the context of Hitler's election to power? Why is it important that young Jews, surveys show so universalist, so concerned with fixing aspects in the world, why is it so important for them to study their own history? Is it really inconceivable to fathom events like those occurring again, especially with genocide occurring today on continents in this world? We here in Los Angeles can not only rely on the self-assured, unabashed strength of Israel, on the authority of Yad Vashem, to make the case for the importance of Holocaust education. We, American Jews, have to make the case to those around us. We have to see that the education being offered is clearly failing. And that case must include an outlook in between the cold academic context and the personally affected emotional hopelessness. I had the opportunity to live and love this third way of Gammy. Thanks to my parents, we traveled a great deal with her, and I sat with her at swimming pools and buffets and comedy shows and in Bedouin tents. She carried herself with dignity and courage and confidence. She spoke in directives. Do good business. Be a good husband. Kiss the kids for me. As a child, I would pick up the phone and she would say, "Go get your father." And if she was here, she would tell me to tell Jerala how much she loves him. She was always right. And she knew that she was always right. And we knew as children that she was right. And she carried herself with an authority and a strength and with so much love. Gammy was personal and hopeful and supportive. She would have loved everybody in this room for loving me. And believe me, she would not have hesitated to tell you if you had something in your teeth. All of it, all of Gammy, came from a place of knowing, of love. And in this one, on the importance of Holocaust education, we have to know that we're right. We have to dare to be outspoken again on a topic that so many people say has been exhausted. We have to dare to make the case again for why studying the Holocaust is important, not only for our children, but for all children. We have to advocate for ourselves without apology. We have to make the memories of our loved ones lost in the sands of time, in the ashes in Europe. We have to turn their memories into blessing, and that doesn't necessarily happen on its own. I think about Gammy every day, as I do the rest of my grandparents. And this week I tried to imagine telling her that the New York Times article said that 66% of millennials don't know where Auschwitz is. I imagined telling her, after she'd spent time in Auschwitz as an inmate during the Shoah. I think she'd tell me that you, meaning me, that you know whose job it is to remind everybody again. And it's us. It's me. It's you. It's all of us in this room, all of us affiliated with the larger Jewish community. We have to reach outside of the silo. We have to break through the bubble of comfort that we live in. We don't have to choose between the reactions of Moses and Aaron. We can stand up and choose the way of Gammy, of Miriam, and we can do it in an outspoken way, knowing that we're right. May Gammy's memory, the memory of Marie Lebovitz, Miriam bat Yosef Vitzipora, may it be a blessing for my family, our community, the entire Jewish people. And may all of the memories of all of the 6 million murdered inspire the world to wake up. And let us say, Amen.